Good evening, Desh. Welcome to the Vision series of Encounter Fireside Talks, and welcome to all our participants. It's really a pleasure, Desh, you could join us, and a very happy New Year to all our participants. And Desh, very happy New Year to you. Overall, welcome. Thank you, and such a pleasure to see you again.
Thank you. Thank you, Sudhir. It's a privilege to be talking to you.
Let me introduce Desh, formerly known as Dr. Deshpande. He needs no introduction to many people in India, but best described as philanthropist, venture capitalist, and an extremely successful serial entrepreneur. Desh is one of the most successful tech entrepreneurs out between the US-India corridor, having launched four different technology ventures with each one of them market capped at $1 billion plus. To add to that, Dr. Deshpande has actively supported entrepreneurial for the social cause for the past 24 years, with a major presence in India and especially in Karnataka. In both India and US, Deshpande Foundation does enormously successful work. The Pond Deshpande Foundation deals with farmers, and Merrimack Valley Sandbox with entrepreneurs in the space of impact. Um, Desh, maybe to start with, just give us a feel for what you're doing today. A lot of people know, but a lot of people may not know.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think this COVID has been quite a game changer. What's heart wrenching is to see all the people who don't have the resources or access to technology going through the suffering. The political upheavals in US has been pretty gut wrenching. But then on the good side, I think it's really gotten a lot of the people very organized. I see all the organizations that I work with, the meetings have become a lot more structured. People come with a very specific agenda, get the job done by the end of the meeting. So I think the productivity has gone up. But we do miss traveling. I and Jayshree, we used to come to India at least 4 times a year. We came back a year ago, and since then we haven't gotten on a plane yet. So we're waiting for the vaccines to come along. But it has created a lot of white space and free time. So we have had a lot more time with our grandchildren. Personally, I turned 70 just a few weeks ago.
Oh,
And
happy
so,
birthday.
yeah, thank you. And I continue to stay in good shape and keep good health and keep good energy. And so I found it to be very creative and productive in terms of having a little bit more time for ourselves. Uh, but uh, but I think it's going to have some profound changes on the world.
So let's talk about the profound changes. I think a lot has been talked about how entrepreneurs dealt with the last 10 months. So let's see what do you think is going to happen in the next 10 to 24 months. What should entrepreneurs be focused on? How are you seeing the upswing happening, if it is happening? What are the permanent changes in how can entrepreneurs look forward to the next 12 to 24 months?
Yeah. So the last 9, 10 months after the COVID, it's been all about surviving and figuring out a way to make sure that you have enough cash to keep the business going. But the next 6 to 8 months are going to be uh, really anticipating where the world is going to be. And one big thing is the acceleration of acceptance of technology at all levels, right? I mean, I think we have seen technology adoption happen uh, throughout the last, whatever, 4 decades of at least my career. Business after business after business getting embracing more and more technology, but it used to be at a slow pace, and the people used to have a lot of objections and because there's always a big resistance to any change.
Right.
But what COVID has done is it's made people embrace technology out of necessity. So I would say that acceleration is almost like 3 to 5 years. You
Hmm.
know, we're going to come into the post-COVID world almost 3, 5 years ahead of where we would have been without the COVID.
And this is that
So,
permanent? Sorry to interrupt you. Is that permanent, or you think some, a substantial part of this change of habit is going to come back as things improve?
Well, technology adoption never goes back,
Mhm.
because I think where the resistance is mostly because it's it's something different. Um, but then, so technology always proves to be more convenient, right? And once people get used to that convenient way of doing things, they're not going to go back.
Right.
However, there will be side effects of that adoption of technology, whether it's cybersecurity or um, you know impact of unwanted impacts of social media and so on.
Right.
And people have to find ways to mitigate it, and there's business opportunities in that too. But people have always overcome those objections and limitations of technology, because technology just happens to be such a powerful tool to make sure that more and more people have access to a better life.
And would you say that technology will enable entrepreneurs to even scale further than perhaps they could think of earlier? Because, fundamentally, technology enables you to reach out. I mean, technology makes sure there's no geography boundaries. Yeah, there's no boundaries anywhere as such. So, is that a massively scaling opportunity for entrepreneurs?
Yeah, so there's two trends, right? One is the technology itself improving. In 1973 is when I graduated from IIT Madras, and I majored in computer science, but I'd never seen a computer before, right? And but technology in the 70s and 80s meant doing technology for technologists, and uh, but there was a lot of excitement. And that excitement has continued. The progress has continued. The Moore's law and all those things. The amount of storage we have, the amount of just this thing that we're doing right now, the video conferencing. This would have been a $10 million system just about 10-15 years ago,
True.
which a lot of the big companies would invest in. And it's amazing, how all this things coming down 1000x or 10,000x. So that trend is continuing, and actually it's a small piece of the technologists continuing to work and improve the technology. So then the technology becomes more accessible, more affordable to everybody. Then the question is, then are there enough people in the world who understand the problems, the local problems, to be able to apply that technology to the problems that they have? So, and that's what's creating huge number of entrepreneurial opportunities everywhere in the world.
Hmm.
And because the problems tend to be, it's a question of identifying a problem and applying the right problem to the right technology. And that's where the entrepreneurial opportunity is. I think creating deep technology used to be the high-tech opportunity 20-30 years ago. Now it's really continuing to use the deep tech to solve the real problems. And so you need a lot more people who understand the problems as opposed to just the technology.
So let's take an example. You worked extensively in Karnataka with farmers. Now, the farming community perhaps is not as tech savvy as what we think they should be. So, how can technology be used to improve crop productivity, to improve disease management of crops, to improve availability of water as such? Is technology going to have an impact at, I mean, that serious a sector in India, which is enormous? I mean, 500, 600 million people are dependent on farming today.
So let me give you two examples that we're working on. One is, we're working with Wadhwani Foundation, which does AI
Hmm.
on pest control. So what you do is you put these little pads, sticky pads in the field. We work with about 120,000 cotton farmers.
Hmm.
So what the farmer happens is, the pest is a big issue in cotton.
Yeah.
And typically what a farmer does is that whenever there's pest that he sees, he just goes to the shop and says, hey, give me some pesticide. And the guy will look at his shelf and see what he has, and he'll just give it to him, right? Because for him, unfortunately, there's not enough sophistication.
Right.
So what we do now is we put these sticky pads, which are like 10 rupees or 15 rupees a piece. And the farmer, with the help with some of the people that we have in the field, they take photographs of those, and those photographs get beamed back, and then the AI engine can look at it and say, this is exactly the type of worm that you should be worried about, and this is the pesticide that you should use. So
Interesting.
that's the sort of the the beginning of easy collection of information and getting to the right conclusion. Another one that's very important for farmers is water. Water is the biggest multiplier of income.
Right.
So there is a satellite that goes around India clicking photographs every 5 days, and it's
Mhm.
been doing it for 10 years, right? India actually collects a lot of information. For example, the groundwater level. I mean, it's amazing how much data that they have.
Hmm.
But so far, even though all this data is being collected, there isn't an easy way to visualize and apply it to the real application. So our global chief technology officer in Silicon Valley, he's an amazing guy, and he single-handedly, given a piece of land, he can recreate the history of that land for the last 10 years. He can tell you the groundwater levels, what happened for the last 10 years, how much rainfall was there
Through satellite imagery.
through satellite imagery.
Okay.
And he can tell you exactly how the water flew, the flow of the water within that field and so on. So we do a lot of these farm ponds. So he can locate the farm pond exactly where it should be within the farm.
Hmm.
And then we can also monitor. We can monitor and see if the farmer is actually getting the two crops that he should get with the water. Is he using the water appropriately? Is he draining the farm pond faster than he should? So, so I think for the first time, the technology is really becoming useful enough and powerful enough to be able to apply to these kind of problems.
Oh, interesting. And
Um,
you're applying that already in India?
Yeah, so we're doing 100,000 farm ponds, right?
Hmm.
We've done 6,000 already, but we're just launching a program to do 100,000. So to do 100,000, you need a lot of machines, a lot of things happening all at the same time.
Yes.
So we're building a control center I come from the networking business, and we always used to build these giant network control centers for the operators so that you can look at every node, every user, run the logistics of actually running that thing.
Yeah.
So we're building a control center in Hubli from where we'll be monitoring and managing these 100,000 farm ponds. Because first you have to make sure that you're constructing the right place, and then you have to manage the construction. And then after you construct, you have to monitor and make sure that you're making best use of that water that you have, which is a
Hmm.
very precious resource. So, uh, so it's exciting to see. Even this stuff could not have happened 5 years ago. I've been on the board of MIT for the last 20 years and watched the
Right.
technology very carefully, and we've been trying to apply technology to a lot of these problems, but they're just a little too complex. It's almost like the more complex the technology inside of the technology becomes possible, the
Mhm.
simpler the use becomes.
And you're
It's a
also
little bit like,
saying, I'm sorry, you're also saying it's not new things coming in. I mean, satellite imagery has been around, images have been taken, it's just lying there. And it needs somebody to think how to put these
no,
pieces
no,
together.
but what's new is all the machine learning languages, AI,
Right.
the GIS, the easy way to map information, visualize data, all of that stuff wasn't there. You almost had to start from scratch. Whereas now you can just pull up the tools and get there very quickly. So the technology has to keep maturing to the point where you can just use it without really knowing all the inside of it. It's a little bit like, an aeroplane is a very complex tool. But so when all of us fly, we don't really need to know how
Right.
aeronautics works, but we just use it, right? So I think the technology, the computer networking, visualization, ML, AI, all of this stuff is getting to the point where we can just use it as opposed to having to know all the inside guts of it.
No, I think that's a great example. We have in our portfolio one of our companies called Cropin, who's
Hmm.
basically, again using satellites
Yeah.
to build a model by which input providers get data on farm crops and so on and so forth to make it more efficient. And that's you're absolutely right that the pieces existed, but they built AI around it. visualization imagery and impact on crop productivity, incomes, disease management, all comes as massive benefits. And more important, what you also mentioned is massive scale.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, no. I think it's a fantastic opportunity to combine the technology together with the business, together with the development sector. Because what happens is a lot of these technologies are very useful in, for example, finding out who is credit worthy so that you can give loans to people,
Right.
insurance, all that stuff. But in addition to figuring out who is capable of credit worthiness, you also need ground effort to make more and more people credit worthy. And that's where the development sector comes in. So it's almost like, I think we need to keep developing technologies, keep developing these free market solutions, and then use the development sectors to develop people and feed them into that market.
And since you mentioned development, and maybe I can use a proxy for development as impact, right? We ourselves are a financial investor, but we are measuring impact every month as to how our companies are creating, whether truck drivers are income is increasing, how many consumers we reach to, how many SMEs we are reaching to, how many women we are reaching to, how many people we got trained. We are measuring that all the time. Do you really think that the 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 thin or thick line, as you may think about, between impact investing and financial investing is really there, or there are two sides of the coin? Because at the end of the day, entrepreneurs are building companies, and you know you build storage systems using technology, using AI, and grain storage is a big issue. I mean, the losses are massive in the country, as an example. So aren't they just two sides of the coin, or there is a big difference between the two?
Well, I think that's the new way of building companies. The old way of building companies was business was business, and the social sector and the society was something else, right?
Mhm.
You made money at any cost, you polluted everything, and then you gave your profit so that somebody could go and fix all that pollution. That doesn't work anymore. Particularly to build a company, I think all the new talent, the younger people, I'm
Mhm.
not sure they would work for companies which don't have that commitment. So the only companies that can attract talent and build a long-term business now are the companies that care for profits, people, and a purpose. You need all of those. If you don't have those, I think it's going to be very difficult to attract talent and retain talent, uh, because I think people at the end of the day are motivated because they want to find some meaning for their lives. And unless a company can stand up and say, the reason why we show up to work every morning is to make this difference, a difference that everybody can believe in, it's going to be very hard to build companies, sizable companies.
And it's not, what you're also saying is it's not a corporate issue. It applies to young companies started by entrepreneurs. And are you also saying, think about it from day one?
Oh, even more so, because
Okay.
young companies, you need people's commitment even more than a big company does, right? I mean, people have to work so hard, they pretty much give up their life.
Mhm.
And unless they can see a clear purpose, they're not going to be committed to that business. And whenever you do a startup, unfortunately, there is only bad news, right? I mean, it takes longer, it's harder, and it takes more money.
Yeah.
And so to get through that, you need a huge amount of commitment from the whole team. And the whole team finds their strength and the purpose for that commitment only because they know what they're doing can contribute. Once upon a time, you could motivate the people by just saying, hey, startup is a new thing. Nobody has done a startup. Let me do a startup. And just proving that you can do a startup in India
Right.
was enough of
Motivate.
a motivation. It was more like, hey, let me show you that you can actually do it in India.
Hmm.
That's old story now. That won't get you going. So I think having that purpose upfront, because that becomes your North Star. That becomes the way you pivot things. And because if you're not really meeting that goal, then you get an opportunity to shift your strategy and
And attract
redo
the best
products.
talent. And attract the best talent.
Oh, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
We've seen it. We've seen it. I mean, we are funding invest entrepreneurs who are solving real problems which have not been solved before, but using technology. And to that extent, we are seeing that traction is very different, overall. That brings me to an interesting question, which applies to, which is indicate, which is, we've talked about entrepreneurs, but what about venture investors? And I think same rules should apply to them. Are you seeing the venture industry changing? And maybe we can talk about India and US. Are there differences, and especially on the two sides of the coin, technology and impact, and financial and impact.
Yeah. So the venture industry, for example, in India, the high tech in India started off with the service business. I got married in 1980, and as you know, Murthy's wife Sudha and my wife are sisters. So I was starting companies here when Murthy was starting Infosys. So followed that Infosys path very closely, and a lot of those companies were built any venture without any venture, right?
Right.
I mean, it's and all the service companies which have done an enormously fantastic job and built a lot of talent and really advanced technology, everything else. But their model is more, it's a service-based model, right? I mean, it's and originally it was just a cost arbitrage, and now maybe it's a little bit of talent arbitrage. But in a service business, you see the opportunities and then you respond to it.
Mhm.
Whereas in the problems that you're talking about, where you're trying to use technology and develop products and so on to make a change, it's a gamble. It's a investment that you have to make, uh, and and so you do need venture capital. You cannot, and the service guys, they would always, every time they would see me, they would say, hey, and they all would have a deep desire to get into the product business, but they never could get in because they could never get to that mindset that you take $10 million, put it on the table, win or lose, right? You have to make that gamble. And if you're in the service business, it's very hard for you to do that because
Right.
you're not used to it. Because when you do that $10 million gamble, along the way there's a lot of question marks, and you need to be able to get through them, and they couldn't get through. So then
It's
the
a different
venture
DNA. It's a
guys,
different DNA.
yeah. So the venture in India started by VCs from US investing money in India, but not too many of them were successful. We went through that whole wave where people were investing in India from US. I think mostly because they would put very little money because they were all used to, they saw this success of cost arbitrage so that you could do things cheaply. They thought they would just be able to build these high tech companies cheaply. You
Hmm.
can't do product companies just because of the cost, right? And also India did not have the talent in terms of product thinking about products, and it requires a slightly different mindset in terms of doing product strategy versus a service strategy. And so we went through that wave. But the new wave, which is very exciting, like all like Chiratae Ventures and so on, are are exciting because now you have the talent. I would say 1% of the India, which is what, 15, 16 billion people, are globally as competent as anybody else in the world in any field, whether it's law or medicine or product management or technology and so on. So there's a huge amount of talent base. Now, it's so exciting to see the amount of money that's going into the venture capital. Every day on your story, I see, oh, today they raised $100 million. Like, I mean, it just flows off your tongue, which was almost impossible to think about five,
Well,
10 years ago.
if I may interrupt, one thing venture capital has done is change the currency of India to dollars and not rupees now.
Yeah, yeah, it's amazing. It's
Yeah.
amazing. So now I think it's things are different. There is talent, there is ability to visualize solutions, both for India and globally, and also technology has more democratized, right? I mean, it's even medicine, for example. I remember when my dad had cataract surgery when he was in US, 76. You go there 15 minutes, you're done. You come back home and you remove your strip and you're all done. That wasn't the case in India. But when you got the other eye done by 1980, 85, something like that, it was the same thing. So anything that happens in even the most advanced technology used in the world, everybody has access to it within 3 months or 6 months.
Right.
And what we did not have was the talent to be able to absorb the technology. But now we do. And slowly we're getting to the point where I think it's almost like the technology will probably start in India and then come out, right? Which is what's happening now.
And coming back to the VC side of it, do you think the venture system needs to change or do things differently or more in India to basically back entrepreneurs, or is it just evolution right now?
No, no, I think it's on a, the momentum right now is huge, right? I mean, particularly after COVID,
Right.
COVID looks like it really accelerated the VC investments over the last 9 months or so. And and so we just, if that momentum keeps going, and as we see more success, I think there'll be even more funds coming in. So I think we are on a good track right now.
Just to give some quantity, last 6 years, about India absorbed about $200 billion worth of PEVC money, and 10 to 20% of that is tech VC.
Hmm,
Um, our belief, and this is our belief, is that in the next 6 to 7 years, India will absorb about half a billion.
hmm,
And we are seeing that on the ground overall. However, we do believe that one critical element is going to be a couple of critical elements are going to be very crucial. One is the biggest one is participation of Indian capital, which is
hmm.
which is less than 5% today. And you know so regulations, due to regulations, perhaps the EPF and insurance is not able to participate right now. But I think if Indian capital comes in to the level of 20-25%, that capital actually has been resident and growing from India companies anyway in the industrial world, and they know how to do things. They know the challenges in the country. So let's call that operating capital, vis-a-vis just financial capital. This combination, to my mind, will really, really even give a new boost to the venture investing in the country. Any thoughts on that?
No, no, you're right. I mean, I think right now, um, it's a lot of it was U.S. money, and then China is very big. But the geopolitics are changing right now,
Yes.
and not quite sure where we're headed with all that. So India needs to get more aggressive with in that investing.
Yeah.
Uh, but hopefully, I think it's both regulations and the desire of the wealth within India to be able to invest in these kind of vehicles. But I think the returns seem to be there, which definitely would motivate the Indian capital to be ready to investing. And I'm sure those guys who have the capital also probably have the influence to change the regulations as well. So um, so I'm very hopeful that we'll restructure and make more capital available.
You mentioned desire. Just to give an example, corporate India, the top five tech service companies in India in the last 10 years have distributed through dividends and share buybacks $48 billion.
Hmm.
Um, I'm sure a part of that money in the future should come from the services industry, at least, if not otherwise.
Yeah, yeah, no, no. I mean, I think also, um, that they need to be convinced that it's a good investment. I think in the initial days when they tried creating their own venture arms and do
Right, right.
mergers and acquisitions and buy and
Did
so on,
not succeed. Yeah,
they did not work. And
that's
so it's a bad taste in the mouth. And so they say, hey, let me just give the money away.
right.
But if as they build their capabilities, it's a better value for the shareholder to be able to do that investing on behalf of those shareholders as opposed to giving them a little bit here, a little bit there, and then they trying to do something with that money.
Hmm.
So
Hmm. Excellent. Let me come to another topic, which I know you're very passionate about. A lot of entrepreneurs have faced challenges in the last 1 year. Many have failed. Your views on failure and going back and rising like a phoenix again. Um, do you see that happening more and more? Any advice on that for entrepreneurs? Picking up the mantle and doing it again.
Yeah. So, I think failure is a part of that journey, right? I mean, it's if you never fail, I don't know, those of you who play bridge, if you bid every hand that you win, then you can never become a champion, right? You're just not pushing it hard enough. So failure is given, but the question is, how do you deal with failure? Let me give you an example. When I was starting my first company in 87 is when I started my first company and those days, the biggest venture capital, in fact, Matrix was the biggest venture capital in Boston, and they had $10 million under their management, right?
Mm-hmm.
They gave you $1 million. They looked at it 100 different ways, and they only gave you money if they knew for sure that if you failed, you hurt more than they hurt, right? So we had to go without salary for a year, all that stuff. And so I did that. I and my other co-founder here, Frank Bruns, we gave up our job. We went without salary for a year. My wife used to keep the job. And finally, dream come true. We raised $3 million from very prestigious venture capitalists, Matrix, TA Associates, and Seven Rosen, and so on. But unfortunately, within 3-4 months, I and my partner had a difference of opinion in terms of how we do the product. I mean, I'm a more time to market person. I think instead of doing a perfect product, it's important to get a product out that some you can add some value that somebody is willing to pay, get it out there, and then you learn from it and you build on it, as opposed to trying to get it perfect. But my partner was a little bit more a technical macho, and he kept saying, no. We were trying to do something that was 10 times better than Cisco router at that time. And I was saying, hey, 2x is good enough. Let's get it out in 9 months. And so we couldn't agree. And he was the more senior person. And so instead of sitting there and saying, I told you so, I decided that I was going to just leave. And I left, right? And that was hard because at that time my wife had given up her job and we had 2 little kids, and and it's not like when you leave these startups you get a severance, right? I mean, if you want to leave, you leave, right? And so that was hard. So the lesson there was, I think every time you face a difficult situation, the difficult situation arises either because of things that are within your control or things that are out of your control. Sometimes markets change, sometimes people change, sometimes whatever situation changes. If things are within your control, then you should do everything you can, because you can work hard, you can do this, you can do that. Whatever you can do, you should do. But if things are not in your control, then you don't want to get stuck in those situations. You want to almost sort of find a way to say, okay, let me shut this thing up and then try again.
Yeah.
And there is a certain amount of empowerment in that part of it. I think most of the entrepreneurs have a very hard time dealing with that situation because you're so passionate and you're so committed to making it successful that you want to keep fighting that issue. So retaining some level of objectivity and that passion and conviction is the trick to be a successful entrepreneur, because it happens either the change you're making is almost like you shut the company and start another one, or you pivot, right? Pivoting is a small failure. Shutting the company and doing the whole thing is like a big failure. I mean, it's the point where you can't even pivot. You have to restart. And so retaining that objective view, because if you're all you do is rational thinking, then you would give up at the very first time you come across a hurdle. That's not an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur has to fight. He has to have a strong conviction in spite of 5 other people telling him that it's not going to work. He knows that it will work because he's already thought through. So it's almost like, the way I think about it is, whenever you start a company, almost all your well-wishers, everybody advises you not to do that. Not because they don't want you to do well, mostly because they love you so much, they don't want to see you hurt. And what you're doing is something very hard, right? And so first time when something goes wrong, all those guys will come back to you and say, I told you. And so you want to, when people say something isn't right, you want to make sure that you keep track of those objections. Let's say there's 50 objections as to why people think you shouldn't do it, but you're still doing it because you know that those 50 objections are not the valid ones. So as you go along, if you have the same objections, you have the strength to deal with it. But if there's a 51st objection, then you better make sure that you look at it seriously and see whether it's something that you should look at or not look at. So developing that sophistication of managing your conviction versus objectively making sure that you're hearing what people are talking about is very important. And if you did that, I think then it becomes uh, an empowering situation going through failures as opposed to a feeling of victim, why me kind of a thing. So
Excellent. There is a question. um, it's more of a comment about Indian VCs not taking enough risk in technology, but doing all sorts of things in retail or mass reaching the consumer.
well, I mean, I think it's a natural evolution. It's a lower hanging fruit, right? I mean, if you take the technology and just apply and you can build a business, why not? As the businesses start getting more and more competitive, you have to build your competitive moat. And that competitive mode comes from deeper technology because you have to start doing something, let's say e-commerce platforms and connecting shared resources. All those are very big right now in India. But once you have like 3, 4, 5 companies in that area, and if you want to start something else with a big advantage over those 3, 4,
It won't.
you
This
need
won't be
you
the
need
same.
deep
Yeah.
yeah, you need deeper technology.
Correct.
So I think the market will almost force you to invest in deeper technology. But at the same time, if nothing is happening, investing in deep technology doesn't make sense, right? So I think it's just a maturing of the market and the consumer base, and it's happening. It's happening pretty rapidly. So those
We've.
of you
Yeah.
who have intentions of who we think have deeper technology to bring to the market, I think we'll have plenty of opportunities in India.
We just put money into a company called KB Coal, which is extracting color out of applying stress to bacteria.
Hmm,
And color is chemicals. Chemicals is harmful to the ecology, or
hmm,
vegetation. Okay, that's also harmful to the ecology. Thousands of liters are used to produce one gene overall, and the traction, and it's very technology. And there are only 2, 3 companies in the world to do this overall,
hmm.
and the traction we are getting is enormous right now
Yeah.
overall. Um, Let me just switch the topic to another um, research. Now, traditionally, India has seen little research in product. Um, in some sense, 10 to 20% of the last $200 billion is tech and VC, which to my mind is a proxy for R&D in some sense. Um, if I see our own portfolio, we've got about 130 patents filed and almost 30 granted. Do you see more and more research happening in industry? Uh, New companies, I think I can understand, but really in industry, do you see a lot of collaboration between education? If not, how do you see that can be promoted? Because that to me is critical in India.
Yeah. So, if you look at the past history over the last 70, 80 years, for example, MIT, a lot of the technology development happened here during World War II, and that was all driven by radars and aeronautics and flying and landing man on the moon. A lot of them were these big programs. In fact, when I joined the board on MIT 20 years ago, MIT was still somewhat isolated from the industries. I
Hmm.
mean, they would work with big industries, but the startup community was not connected with the MIT at all, not that much. I didn't go to MIT, and part of the reason why the president and the chairman approached me and recruited me is because I'd done some successful startups here. And so we actually, our first big initiative at MIT was setting up this Deshpande Center for Technological Innovation. That is, most of the companies that we started in 70s and 80s came out of technology from Bell Labs. And by year 2000, when I joined the MIT board, there was no more Bell Labs. But at the same time, government was investing about $50 billion a year in research at universities. And so our first foundation philanthropic effort was to see how that $50 billion can result in more opportunities for more entrepreneurs. So the center at MIT was all about connecting an innovator to relevance as he's innovating, as opposed to waiting until the whole thing gets done.
Sure.
Because I think you get two separate communities otherwise, because you cannot mandate innovation, right? And therefore, it becomes clubby. You create a nurturing environment for people to think and come up with ideas. Slowly, it becomes clubby and moves further and further away from the real world. And then they get more into impressing each other as opposed to impact. So a lot of great ideas come out of it, but it's like a warehouse full of research ideas, which have no impact. So you don't really have that virtuous cycle of having a great idea, having impact, and then feeding it back into creating more ideas. And that was the idea behind the center. So the simple idea of connecting innovator to relevance turned out to be very powerful. So within 4 or 5 years, anything that went through the center, the Deshpande Center at MIT, was 3 times more likely to have an impact than otherwise.
Interesting.
Either result in a startup or technology license or something like that. And then we rolled it out as a nationwide program with National Science Foundation. And now it's a nationwide program with a $7.4 billion agency, and lots of companies are going out. Now, it so happens that India actually is ramping up quite a bit. They're almost like 40,000 crores a year now in terms of the amount of research that they do. But I don't know even if 40 good ideas come out of it. I mean, there's a lot of great research that happens, but in terms of the impact. So a couple of years ago, I wanted to duplicate the success that we have had in US with this National Science Foundation nationwide program in India. So together with Chris Gopalakrishnan, who also went to IIT Madras, my wife also went to IIT Madras. So we started this Gopalakrishnan Deshpande Center at IIT Madras. It's not an IIT Madras initiative because we run the program out of IIT Madras, IIT Bombay, IIT Delhi, and IISc. And it's called Incubate. The idea is to bring this methodology of connecting researchers to relevance and run it for about 4 or 5 years, show the success, and maybe make it a part of the government program. So I think it's really bringing those two communities together. Otherwise you get a society where you have thinkers and you have doers. And you need to get thinkers to do and doers to think.
Right.
And that connection, I think, is what India lacks right now, because we have a lot of very good thinkers. And of course, we have a lot of good entrepreneurs. And trying to bring them together is where the secret is.
So thank you. That's very interesting. I think R&D needs to get done in a bigger way. And I agree with you. The doers and thinkers have to get together, produce something and make it useful and commercialize lots more than what we've done so far. Digital divide. COVID has increased the digital divide enormously. There's so many people, for instance, in education. And this question is by Vikas Gurgunti, who just put it here. How do you bridge the digital divide? In fact, some part, a big part of India in the last 10 months could not get educated overall. So how do you bridge that now?
Well, I think, it is a problem and it's going to take time, but the acceptance is getting accelerated. So for technology to reach the rural India, it has to become more affordable, more user-friendly, and easier to use, right? So usability, cost, and have to become very important. So the model, at least with the foundation, what we're seeing is that, when Muhammad Yunus did the Grameen phone in Bangladesh, the whole idea was the mobile phone was not affordable by one person.
Right.
So one person in India would buy a phone and he would start a business, and then 30 other people would use that phone, right? So the cost came down by 30. we're trying to see if we can do something similar in rural India now, where it's both. They lack both. They lack the talent to be able to use it properly, and then they lack the equipment, which is very expensive. So, for example, for e-commerce, can you have an entrepreneur do all the e-commerce for the village, so that people, he can hunt around, he can find the best price for everybody. So it's like a remote kirana store, right? A
Right.
kirana store guy, if he has technology. So in education, we do sort of a lot of English teaching, confidence building, and so on for kids. And so what we're doing is we the kid that has sort of a access to a good smartphone, about five other kids get together and they collectively learn. And so now we're trying it out with their tablets.
Mhm.
Having a tablet for every kid is still very expensive, but you can have one for five kids and
Right.
find a way to share it and so on. So I think it's the problem is significant. Um, the digital divide programs have been going on now for a long time. It was known that we cannot have the digital divide, but a lot of the programs, that I remember 5, 10 years ago, there would be like corporations coming along donating computers, and
Mhm.
the computers would go to the village and they would just sit there, because there wasn't enough, they weren't user friendly enough, and there wasn't enough talent.
Mhm.
So I think slowly those things are coming together. So I'm very hopeful that COVID is actually accelerating. For example, we used to do a residential skilling program, and obviously with COVID, we can't do that. So we have a platform to distribute the knowledge, all the digital lessons, and we're using flipped classrooms now. So these are all college kids, a little bit more advanced, but in villages, 95% of them don't get jobs, right?
Right.
Still have to do something with them, and so they use technology to do this flipped classroom model, where they would go through the content, and then we just do one-on-one sessions to sort of make sure that they've understood what they've gone through.
Sure.
So there's opportunities for a lot of innovation there to make things a little bit more affordable, a little bit more useful. Also leverage the talent, whatever little talent that you have there, to solve the problems.
Dr. Deshpande, final word for entrepreneurs. Do's and
Well,
don'ts. Be successful.
well, I think it's pretty simple. The world is changing, and it's changed quite a bit. When I started my career 50 years ago or whatever, since then the world has changed, but now it's changing even faster.
Right.
And every time something changes, each one of us have two options. Either we grudgingly accept the change, or we lead the change. And if you believe that that change is good for the world, then you need to lead the change. And every opportunity to lead a change in the world is an entrepreneurial opportunity. And as the world changes faster and faster, there's more and more opportunities. That's why I think the future of the economy is going to be the mix of job makers and job seekers is going to change quite a bit. Previously it used to be big corporations where you built
Right.
one
Right.
large company and hired 200,000 people. That's not going to happen anymore. And so it's going to be a lot of job makers and a lot of job seekers. So 1 to 50, 1 to 100, 1 to 200, or whatever. And even the job seekers have to be very entrepreneurial. Even if they're not the entrepreneurs themselves, they have to be entrepreneurial. So people willingly accepting change and believing the change and leading the change is where the future opportunity is. And therefore, that's where the careers are going to be built. That's where the livelihoods are going to be built at all levels of the society. And therefore, I'm a big believer in this entrepreneurship and having the right mindset where people are very optimistic. I mean, there are two characteristics that define the entrepreneur. Number one, They are optimistic. They always believe that tomorrow is going to be better than today. And also they tend to be a little naive in a sense. They they believe that they can solve any problem. Whether it's true or not doesn't matter. If you go through your whole life
But that's needed.
believing that tomorrow is going to be better than today, whether it's real or not, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You led a happy life.
Yeah.
So being an entrepreneur is the best way to live a living, I think.
And any message to Indian families, Indian investors to put more money into venture in India?
Well, I think they have to become entrepreneurial in their own way too, right? I mean, they cannot, I think sometimes people get lost between giving up traditions and embracing new things. In Kannada, there's a Mankutimana Kagga, which says, Hale chiguru hosaberu kudiralu, hale beru hosa chiguru kudiralu marasavagu. That is, if you want a beautiful tree, you want the old roots and the new shoots, right? So I think people get mixed up between do you retain your roots or do you do new things? You have to do both. You have to be grounded. You have to be grounded in your roots, in your traditions, in your values, and everything else. But at the same time, constantly, every year, you need new leaves. And if you don't have that, you don't have a beautiful tree. So I would say every family, every person, you have to learn new things every year. You have to find new ways to participate in the world. And that's what makes life so beautiful.
Yeah.
So I would say embrace change.
No, no, well said. And on this wonderful example which you gave, thank you so much for joining us in this session today. I know we've run a little bit over time, but it's been very useful. And the messages to entrepreneurs and especially Indian investors is very, very appropriate. Technology is changing India, and it's a time to build new India. And thank you for that message. Dr. Deshpande, thank you very much. Really a pleasure to see you. And we hope to see you soon in India as soon as flights start. And now there's a direct flight from US to Bangalore. Um, but you have to go from Boston, you have to go to San Francisco, by the way. So, so hopefully India will bridge that gap also. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Sudhir.
Thank you. Thank you again to all the participants. And we wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.